one of the emphases of our curriculum here is public theology. And the question might be, what is the role of biblical interpretation and Scripture as you put it together with the emphasis of the curriculum on public theology? And it strikes me that there are a couple of ways you can think about this. One is, again, if you think in terms of the choices that the public discourse in North America gives with regard to the interpretation of the Bible, if those choices are conservative, Bible-believing, or liberal, Bible-dismissive, I think the role of the seminary in terms of public theology would be to suggest that those are not the only categories that one can deal with when one is thinking about the Bible. There might be a third or a fourth category that, that functions really more appropriately in the 21st century, and at the same time does justice to biblical materials in a way that neither a dismissive nor a quote-unquote conservative biblical hermeneutic does. So I think it's the role in terms of the teaching faculty of this seminary to think through those issues of public biblical interpretation for the church and for the wider church. Again, I think here in particular Lutheran theological emphases can be helpful here, but we have people who are teaching on the faculty that are not in Bible, that are not Lutheran, and they bring their own gifts with regard to that common project. Okay, so the biblical narrative, its character, settings, plot, and so on, and values have eaten its way very deeply into Western consciousness. So Northrop Frye, who is a great literary critic, could say that it's impossible really to get away from that. If you read literature, the storylines and so on, the narrative, the shape, the flow are deeply influenced by biblical materials. Similarly, somebody like Robert Jewett extended that into not only print media, but film media. So he would say that many of the films that have come out of Hollywood, although they're not dealing with explicitly religious material, are in some sense working with, thinking through, interpreting basically biblical materials. And in some ways doing that in an idiom that is more that is more target-oriented, and people, in one sense, are more receptive to being shaped by non-explicit reference to biblical narrative than they are to explicitly a biblical narrative that is explicitly formed in biblical characters, tropes, and so on. I think that's really, I think it's true, I think it's right, and again, I think this really opens up the need for people who are, in particular, biblical scholars, to think through how their knowledge of biblical materials might help critique, how they might lift up where that sort of work is being done well, and at the same time perhaps engage in some constructive criticism. So, in other words, there's a much more natural relationship between many of the cultural products that we are experiencing, even in terms of film, and biblical materials than what might at first glance appear to be the case. So to the extent that you are aware of those sorts of things in the wider culture, I think the Bible can speak with great clarity to those issues as well.